The notch is the single most important skill any aspiring DCS pilot can learn. It is so important that it can and will make up for any other inadequacies of skill to a certain point. It is a bar that truly separates the good players from the bad. Recently, the Ops Center by Mike Solyom published a video entitled "The Real Truth Behind the Radar Notch," which, for all intents and purposes, is well put together and gives noobs out there some very useful information on the notch. While I can see that the video series is heavily geared more towards those wishing to do milsim and LARP as their favorite fighter squadron, these videos, at least this one in particular, have left out one very key ingredient at times. Digital Combat Simulator World by Eagle Dynamics is a video game. Now, I'm sure a lot of people out there are going to be upset, shaking their fists, and scoffing at me for saying this, but this exact reality is why some extremely glaring issues start to appear when you get down to it and really come to learn how things work within the simulation. Again, Mike Solyom did a fantastic job with his presentation and included some very helpful tips specific to the way notching works in DCS. However, it's statements like these,
but I see a lot of comments taking its effectiveness to an extreme. The radar warning receiver. This is not a precision instrument. Active radar-guided missiles can be particularly difficult to defeat using a notching maneuver.
That, to put in the most blunt words possible, are wrong and, at worst, misguided. Now, I don't blame Mike Solyom for believing these things. I wish they were true. I pray every night that Eagle Dynamics comes to their senses and models things quote-unquote correctly for once. But if you're going to make a video dissecting how things work in DCS, and especially the efficacy of a technique that is well known within certain communities to be insanely effective, then it helps to be 100% real with the audience. So, we'll be taking a look at some of the claims made and showing you, the viewer, the actual real truth behind the notch in DCS. One claim made by Mike Solyom is that the RWR is not a precision instrument, and he would be correct about that if this were real life. However, this is a game, and while developers like Heatblur have put in many hours of work into modeling RWRs to be realistic and inaccurate like their real counterparts, Eagle Dynamics and other developers have not done this. And so the RWR, for lack of a better term, is a precision instrument in DCS. The inaccuracy of the RWR that is demonstrated in his video is optimistic, especially for an Eagle Dynamics RWR. The best aircrafts for performing the notch in DCS are, in order, the F-15C, the F-18, and F-16. This is simply because the RWRs are so accurate and effective. The Flaming Cliffs 3 F-15C RWR for years has been known to the community as perhaps the single best RWR to perform the notch with, since symbols do not jump around and simply transition smoothly, providing supreme accuracy to the pilot on the bearing to radars. The F-18's RWR, when using the actual MFD page for it, even has dedicated notch angle gaps that make it almost comically easy to perform. The F-16's RWR has become less accurate over time, but is still far superior to a lot of other RWRs modeled in DCS in terms of display accuracy. As long as you know what you're doing, even the vague accuracy of the SPO 15 can be effective for performing the notch in DCS. The notch in DCS is a practically foolproof, easily repeatable phenomenon that to people like myself is effectively a science. It is so reliable that there are arguments and proponents to the notch that suggest there is really no other reason to fight any other way. The notch is so easy that you may do it incidentally just by turning cold. To be clear, I am talking specifically about Fox 3 missiles. Fox 1 is even easier, but you really want to be the guy forcing the opponent to notch in that era of BVR than the guy doing the notching. In DCS, the AIM-120C-5 is more or less the best missile available to players. However, the biggest flaw of this missile, and all other missiles, besides the extremely questionable guidance logic, is the fact that it is extremely easy to notch. Now, in real life, the AIM-120 has a medium pulse repetition frequency mode used in the active terminal phase of flight. What does this mean? This means that the missile should be practically impossible to notch, since medium PRF was designed to track targets at any aspect of flight, albeit with less range than high PRF. In DCS, the AIM-120 only has a high PRF mode. In reality, it should switch from high PRF to medium PRF at some point during the active phase. It does not do this, however, and is therefore extremely easy to defeat with the notch even inside the theoretical no escape zone. The notch window in DCS is roughly plus or minus 5 degrees off the 3.9 line of the jet, although you really want to be as close to that 90 as possible for the best results. Slowing down will help you both hit the notch angle and stay in it as the missile closes in, and I recommend staying below Mach 0.8 when you notch. But you can notch at pretty much any speed given decent accuracy. Just a few years ago, you could actually notch at 30,000 feet and well over Mach 1.3 like it was nothing, and the missile would never reacquire. This is a little tougher these days, but still a piece of cake when you really get down to it. Also, contrary to what you may think, notching is very much an instantaneous effect in DCS. The moment you hit that notch angle, the missile seeker will have been defeated. The only reason to stay in the notch until the missile either flies past you or hits the ground is because there is a chance that it will reacquire if you exit the notch too early. Another key piece of information to understand that Mike Solyom does indeed cover in his video is the effects of ground clutter. Now, in real life, and as modeled in several modules, is the ability for radars to ignore notching entirely in certain situations, those being lookup. In a jet like the F-14, you can manually disable the main lobe clutter filter, which is the filter that removes ground clutter, to completely ignore the notch effect. It also does this automatically against targets that are 3 degrees above the horizon. This automatic disabling of the MLC filter is a standard feature amongst pretty much any modern radar. This feature is even modeled on the AIM-120, however it is extremely binary. If a target is even 1 degree above the horizon, regardless of altitude, the missile becomes impossible to notch. You could be 100 feet off the ground, but if the missile is at 80 feet, you can expect to be hit since clutter will never affect the seeker. This issue persists in look down as well, where regardless of altitude, ground clutter will affect the missile seeker and make it possible to notch. You can notch missiles at 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 1 million, etc. as long as the missile is physically above you when you are notching. It doesn't actually matter in-game whether or not you are low enough for clutter to realistically affect the seeker. I still recommend getting low, since the higher you are, the longer you have to stay in the notch since the missile has to actually fly past you to be fully defeated. Where if you are low, notching will typically force the missile into the ground, affording you a much faster missile defeat time and therefore a faster recommitment onto target. That's typically why you will see people hug the deck during the notch. It's not really for the ground clutter, it's for the ground itself. One extremely useful tip you can apply in your own adventures into learning to notch is that if you are unsure of the accuracy of your notch or afraid to bank into the missile and possibly put it into the RWR blind spot, you can simply kick the rudder in the direction needed to stay in the notch. If the missile is in front of the 3.9 line, then kicking the rudder away from the missile will momentarily correct this, and kicking into the missile will correct angular issues if the missile is behind the 3.9 line. Again, since notching is instantaneous, the momentary kick into the notch can be enough at times to completely defeat the missile. I suggest trying it out once you've practiced actually getting into the notch without it. One final thing before we wrap things up here. Chaff. Countermeasures in DCS do not function like they do in real life, at least when ED modules and modeling is concerned. Every single time you pump out a piece of chaff or a puff of flares, a virtual dice is rolled. The probability of the dice roll being in your favor is equal to an arbitrary number set in the game files by ED. That being said, you actually don't even need a single piece of chaff to defeat radar-guided weapons. As an anecdote, I've honestly stopped bringing chaff in favor of bringing more flares whenever I fly. I do this because I know either I'm going to kinetically defeat a missile, or I'm going to notch it. In any infrared missiles I can defeat by spamming flares. Chaff can help, especially against semi-active missiles, but it truly is an unnecessary feature in DCS as things currently stand. That's just how it is. In conclusion, notching in DCS at this point in time is the single most important skill you can learn. A lot of people downplay it, a lot of people oversell it, but those people aren't too far off from the truth. The real point of this video is to provide the public with correct information. Am I saying Mike Solyom is wrong? No. He makes really fantastic presentations for beginners, but there's always a caveat that's missing, and that is DCS being a game. Games can be easily min-maxed, unlike real life, and results are almost always perfectly repeatable. Also, to be fair, most of this Ops Center video tries to push people towards kinetic defeat over seeker defeat, and I wholeheartedly agree.
In either case, a notch maneuver can help to kinematically defeat the missile even if the radar never loses track.
You can just as easily beam an incoming missile as long as you do so outside the minimum abort range. Honestly, I hope that one day, Eagle Dynamics can put some real time and effort into giving us a better seeker model so that notching is no longer this end-all, be-all technique. Perhaps this video will convince a number of you to go out and learn to notch, perfect it, and do it non-stop. Maybe enough people will complain on the forums and in general that it finally gets Edie to do something about it. Anyways, with all that out of the way, I want to thank you all for watching, especially the channel members for supporting these endeavors, and have a nice day.